What's up, motherfuckers? It's Halloween, or at least it should be when this video gets uploaded, I hope. I'm going to tell you about the scariest thing ever. But first, I'm dressed as the scariest thing ever. Everything. I don't care about Halloween. I stopped trick-or-treating when I was probably 12. I can't even eat candy anymore. It hurts my teeth. All the candy I eat just makes my teeth burn. It sucks. I hate it. Want nothing to do with it. Horror? Never been a fan. I want to be a fan. I want to get into horror. It's never happened though. Haven't seen a lot of horror I like. There are some horrors that I like, but I'm gonna take a page out of the Drowning in Kayfabe Man's book today to talk about something that's not scary because it's horror. It's scary because it's insane and horrible and the worst thing ever. I'm going to tell you about the worst anime ever made, Garzeys motherfucking Wing, which also happens to be one of my favorite anime. Now that might sound like a paradox. How can it be one of your anime and one of the worst? Well, it's one of my favorite because it's one of the worst. And the reasons that it's one of the worst are really interesting to dive into. So that's what we're going to do. And oh my god, this fucking wig. It's hot. It is hot in my room. I have a heat lamp on me. Jesus Christ. Goddamn. Garzeys Wing was made in the mid to late 90s. And it was directed by Yoshiyuki Tomino. If you don't know who that is, Yoshiyuki Tomino is one of the most important anime creators of all time. He created Mobile Suit Gundam. And you cannot overstate the influence of Mobile Suit Gundam. It really was this fucking huge deal. It was basically the Star Wars of anime. And believe me, Yoshiyuki Tomino is the George Lucas of anime in so many ways. The thing about Gundam is that, like George Lucas with Star Wars, Yoshiyuki Tomino was sort of reined in. He was not important when he made Gundam. There was a lot of design decisions he wanted to make, and some of them sound good. Some of the things he wanted to do with the series that he couldn't do sounded interesting. But nonetheless, he was heavily reined in, because at the time that he made Gundam, robot shows were for kids. And he wanted to make a robot show that was more adult and intelligent and political, and they let him, but they didn't really let him, you know? Like, there's still a lot of kiddie robot elements to Gundam. I'm getting off topic. The point is, Gundam is really important. And over time, as Tomino kept making shows, he slowly got more and more unhinged as he was able, much like George Lucas, to get away with basically doing whatever he wanted, because he's Yoshiyuki fucking Tomino. And, you know, for a long time he was forced to keep working on Gundam just because Gundam was super popular. But eventually he left Gundam. And everything he's done since leaving... I mean, the last few Gundam series he did were insane. There was, like, Double Zeta and Victory Gundam. No one likes them. They're crazy. But then he kept going, and everything he's done since then has been just unhinged, crazy shit. For better or for worse. Sometimes it's not that bad. Turn A Gundam is a good show. Fucking Overman King Gyner, debatable. Gundam G-Recko, which is on TV right now, debatable. But the things he did other than those, one of them's Garzeys Wing, not so debatable. This 3-episode OVA, for one thing, it obviously should not have been 3 episodes. What happened here is that Garzeys Wing is like a fantasy epic. And it really is trying to tell like a really large-scale story in 3 episodes. It's actually tied into a universe from a different Yoshiyuki Tomino show. He did a show called Aura Battle or Dunbine, which I think was in the late 80s or early 90s. And it's like a 39-episode show, and it takes place in a world called Byston Well. So, Aura Battle or Dunbine has this kind of like big joined universe. I think Wings of Rion might be in the same universe, which is a show he did after Garzeys Wing, which is also completely terrible. But he did a bunch of shows in this universe, and one of them's Garzeys Wing, but it's not really connected to the others in a strong enough sense that you need to see them. You don't need to. Believe me, having seen the other shows will not make Garzeys Wing make more sense. It just doesn't make sense. It's 3 episodes long. It feels like an entire 13-episode series at least, if not a 26-episode series, crammed into 3 episodes. The thing is spastic, intense, crazy. It is crazy. When you watch this thing, your eyes widen, your jaw drops, and you can't believe that this is possible. You can't believe you're witnessing the things you're witnessing. And if you watch it in Japanese, it's already a clusterfuck. It has so many issues. For one thing, the voice acting in the Japanese version tries to be legitimate. It's all pretty wooden. It's not really anything special, but it tries to be legitimate. There's just nothing to work with. The script is trash. The story makes no sense. The animation makes no sense. The pacing makes no sense. It just jumps between things constantly, and you're just like, what the fuck is happening? But the animation is like, it's like it had a budget and certain scenes look great. There's like a fight scene in episode 2 that looks great, and then other scenes look ridiculously bad. Like one cell sliding across a screen slowly, and you can tell it's not connected to the background, and it looks like the worst thing you've ever seen. Like this show has legitimately the worst animation I've ever seen in a show, right next to pretty decent quality fight scenes within like 5 minutes of each other. It's crazy. The design sense is god-awful. The characters are all ugly. Most of the whole thing is brown. Like, everything's brown. It's in this like really shitty looking fantasy world. The outfits look like shit. The main character looks like he's wearing a fucking, like, a bag over his body or something. It's so stupid and bad looking, and, like, the monsters are kind of cool, I guess, but they're just kind of generic fantasy monsters. It's just a bad looking show. Despite occasional elements of decent animation, it's a bad looking show, and a badly written show. But when Garzeys Wing sort of became the cult hit that it is, because if you watch it in Japanese, you just go, wow, that was fucking horrible, I have no idea what I just watched. But if you watch it in English, that's when it becomes a masterpiece. Now, I don't know why Garzeys Wing was brought to the US, but it was brought by Central Park Media, and I guess that really answers the question, because the president of Central Park Media, his favorite anime was one called MD Geist, which is widely considered to be absolutely atrocious. But this guy loved it, and MD Geist was the logo mascot of US Manga Corp, which is the fucking the name under which they released their anime, under which Central Park Media released their anime. So Central Park Media released all kinds of shit in the 90s and early 2000s. They didn't give a fuck. They released all this terrible, terrible schlock that makes you go, how the hell did that get brought anywhere? Why would anyone watch this and think, oh, everyone in the world's gonna enjoy that? So not only did they bring it to the US, but they dubbed it. And it's the most hilarious dub ever. For one thing, all the characters shout constantly. Everyone. They all just shout. Everyone shouts. They stumble over their lines every 5 seconds. They're inconsistent with their characters. They yell over one another. There's like no sense of timing to the dub at all. It was just not directed. No one told these people what to do, and these people walked into a booth, shouted a bunch of lines. It sounds like they were reading the script for the first time. Like, they came into the booth, had the script put in front of them, and they read it. The first line that Chris Chiaki, the main character, says, he says, like, I will go there, and then I will be back for the pool party, Rumiko. Like, he literally fucks up her name in the first line of the film. It's baffling. It's like it's like it came from another world. As you watch it, you can't believe it's really happening in front of you. That this was like made seriously for sale. And no one really knows why this happened. Like, Yoshiyuki Tomino came to an anime convention not long after the release of Garzeys Wing, and they tried to ask him a bunch of questions. By the way, I know this because of the Anime News Network article Buried Garbage, Garzeys Wing, which was written in 2007 and introduced a lot of people, including myself, to Garzeys Wing. It's similar to this video I'm doing now, but in much shorter form, and it was just meant to be like a, hey, here's some weird anime. But the guy who wrote that article had worked for Central Park Media around this time, and he said that like they all tried to get answers from Tomino about it, and he was just like, I don't want to talk about it. So Tomino knew this was a disaster. He knew that things had gone wrong. An anime blogger I used to know named Pats once took like years later, like 10 years later, he took a Garzeys Wing DVD to Tomino at a signing at an anime convention, and Tomino burst out laughing at the sight of it. And he did sign it. So, you know, obviously he knows it's terrible. But I don't know how this dub happened. It's crazy. Like I don't get why they would all shout all the lines. You'd think that if you had any idea what you were doing, even if you had no idea what you were doing, why would you shout all your lines? It's such a weird thing. How did it happen? So, Garzeys Wing, when you start watching it, you know immediately something's wrong. Because the first shots are of two characters you don't know having a really weird conversation. They're just sitting there. Like, it looks like Chris is on his motorcycle and he's like sitting at like what looks like I guess he's on the side of the road. And Rumiko's like, why do you have to go back now? You're gonna miss the class reunion. And he's like, I'll go there and then I'll be back. And then the camera pans down to this like enormous cicada lying on its back, scrambling like, and it just like pans down to this cicada dying on the side of the road. And then it cuts back to Chris driving. Or it cuts to Rumiko and she says, you are so easygoing. And then Chris is driving. And it's like, what happened? And then 5 seconds later, Chris is driving down the road. The camera pans over to a shrine. And he says, oh, it's the Shiratori Shrine. That's the place where Yamato Tokero no Mikoto came down from the sky. And then a giant rainbow duck swoops down from the sky and steals his soul out of his body, drags it into the air, and he's all going like, oh, ah! And then it's just like, title card, Garzeys Wing. And that's when you know. That's when you know you've stepped into a whole other world. You know that things are different now. Your life will never quite be the same. And the duck is yelling, show me the ancient Japanese man's spirit. and then his body is like, his like ghost body is floating through this like rainbow fucking sky. He's like, oh, what are you, a ghost? And he's like, why do you think this is the work of a ghost? Then are you Yamato Takeru no Mikoto? And then these like random women are there. And they're like, a man is falling down. A young man, isn't he? And the reason I'm telling you all this, even though you could watch this yourself, is that there's a clip from that Anime News Network article called Garzeys Wing Comedy Gold. And he took this whole scene and a few other scenes that he thought were some of the best scenes from the show and just, you know, had a clip show of them. And it's hilarious. And before I saw Garzeys Wing, I had watched that clip show a bunch of times with my friends. And I can honestly say that I learned new things every time I watched it because so much was happening that I did not process it. Like, when they're falling and the two girls are there and they say, a man is falling, a young man, isn't he? I just didn't understand. I thought they were in a car or something, or like they were on the road, because that's the thing. 1 second ago he was on the road. Now he's flying through a Technicolor dream world, and then a fucking fairy girl gets stuck in his necklace and dragged with him. And what actually happened there, as I understand it, is that he passed through the fairy world, and those two girls are fairies who are commenting on him. And then another fairy, Falaria Fa, I know that because that's the name of my Terra character, gets caught in his necklace, and he drags her down into Byston Well with him. So she's not from Byston Well, she's from this fairyland, and he just passed through there in this, like, 1 second, completely unexplained moment. Like, we learn later that she like complains about how she's been dragged from her home, but we don't understand why that has happened unless you've inferred it from watching that first scene. So Garzeys Wing, you can only even comprehend it once you've, like, given it a lot of thought. Like, once you've looked back and gone, oh, that scene was supposed to be where he got this item. You couldn't tell because he, like, picked it up in 1 second in some shot, but it was actually important, and now he has it in some later scene. Like, it's always like that. And the dialogue is, of course, classic. If you watch that clip, the Justin Savakis clip, it's beautiful. There's the scene when Chris wakes up in bed, and he's communicating with Chris from Byston Well through a necklace that he's wearing. What you have to understand about this is that when you watch it in the Buried Garbage clip, you might just be thinking, all right, they're talking to each other through the bells. What you have to understand is that the first scene, the first 10 minutes, is Chris's soul getting removed from his body and put into this Byston Well area. And we don't see the original Chris, who was on the motorcycle, until he comes home and goes to bed, and then he wakes up the next day, and there's another Chris talking to him through his necklace. The Chris in the necklace doesn't explain, hey, I'm another you. I'm trapped in another world. We've been split in half. We're two halves of the same person. None of that happens. The first thing you hear is, like, I think we could communicate through these bells. Maybe there's a way to get back through the bells. And then Chris wakes up and he's like, oh my god, I felt like I was having a dream. and then they just start talking through these bells. They haven't established anything. And they just keep talking, and the Chris in the other world is like, 12th and 13th century foreigners surround me. 12th and 13th century foreigners surround me. How are foreigners from 2 different time periods surrounding you? He says he's being chased by a real I'm being chased by a real army. Even dinosaurs are here, and they use bows and arrows. My sword is unbelievably dull. And when I heard that the first time, I thought, okay, so the dinosaurs use bows and arrows? Is that what he's saying? That he doesn't mean that, I later learned. And I have to admit something. I've never watched all of Garzeys Wing. I've never watched it from start to finish. It's 3 episodes long, and I've never sat through all 3 episodes of Garzeys Wing, because it's impossible. It is the most mentally taxing thing imaginable. It's not to say that there's nothing good in episodes 2 and 3, because they have plenty. Episode 1 is just way more high density with the funny shit, and then episode 2, there'll be long stretches where you just, like, kind of lose consciousness and you're not sure what's happening. And then some really hilarious shit will happen, like this one scene where they use this white drug to distract monsters, and the girl's like, we use this white drug to distract the monsters, and Chris is like, we have something similar in our world. It's called a drug. It makes you act funny, and like it. He literally gives like a don't do drugs speech at random in the middle of episode 2. And I've often said that I think that Garzeys Wing, the real narrative, is the story of Chris's sword. Because in the first scene when he shows up in Byston Well, he's naked and he has wings on his feet. And somehow he gets a sword and he's trying to fight with it, but the sword is really dull and bad. And he keeps saying, like, wow, this sword sucks so much. Then he's talking to Chris in the other world and he says, my sword is unbelievably dull. And if you're paying attention to these details, if you've noticed the dull sword thing, then you'll laugh your ass off when the sword breaks later in the episode and he goes, I knew it! Just like it was eating away at him. And then later, in the 3rd episode, he gets a much nicer sword, and he's like, oh yeah, now I've got a real sword. And I'm pretty sure that one breaks too. He's just a human. Humans are just human. They come into this world with dreams and aspirations. They want it all, and they try to use the power of the earth and power of the spirit. You are right.